The suburban gas station outside Chicago was bathed in the pale yellow glow of fluorescent lights, quietly spilling onto the winter night. Snow drifted down onto the damp hair of the little girl, her wide eyes fixed on the gray car roaring away and leaving a long tire mark on the ice-white road. "I'll be good. Mother. Please don't go," she whispered, voice quivering with despair. But the car did not stop. It melted into the night as if it had never existed. The girl stood there, only 7 years old, her thin canvas shoes soaked and freezing, her small hands shaking uncontrollably. A passerby pulled over and knelt beside her. "Child, where are your parents?" he asked. No one came back. No one answered. And so Isabelle Hartley, the child who was left behind, officially began her life in a coldness more bitter than winter's snow. And colder still than a shattered heart. 15 years later, in her private practice in downtown Boston, Isabelle stared at the computer screen. The file open before her described a middle-aged woman struggling with anxiety after divorce. Yet the patient's words echoed endlessly in Isabelle's mind. "I don't deserve to be loved anymore." Isabelle closed her eyes and let out a soft sigh. That phrase cleaved open old wounds. She, too, had once believed she was unworthy of love, never good enough for anyone to stay. No family. No one who truly needed her, save the patients who came and went. She pulled out her childhood journal and opened to the very first page, its edges worn. In shaky pencil, 7-year-old Isabelle had scrawled, "I will save myself. I will not cry again." From that day on, she had never broken that promise. She lived alone. No close friends. No lovers. Her practice was where she spent more time than in her small apartment on the 3rd floor of an aging building. When the appointment bell rang, Isabelle looked up and thought, as she always did, another patient. Another lost soul. And once again, I'll be their guide. But she did not know that today's patient would be the one to pull her back from her own edge. Damien Caldwell sat motionless in the glass-walled office on the 58th floor of Caldwell Holdings. The sunset bled across his walnut desk, but no one cared to admire it, certainly not Damien. His eyes were locked on the email displayed on his screen, a share transfer agreement sent by his half-brother, Nolan Caldwell. Its terse, blade-sharp message read, "You are mentally unfit to run the corporation. Mother and I have agreed, you should step aside. Permanently." Damien did not reply. His left hand twitched, an old signal that a panic attack was creeping back. He tilted his head and let his gaze drift to the tilted photograph on his desk. It showed his father, Richard Caldwell, the man who once held the 3rd largest financial empire in America. His father had died in a slip on the marble stairs at the family mansion, an accident the police promptly ruled non-criminal. But Damien knew the truth. That death had followed a vicious argument. He remembered hearing the crash of something breaking in his father's study late at night. When he rushed in, his father lay bleeding at the bottom of the stairs. His stepmother, Lillian, stood nearby, expression unmoved. "An accident, Damien. Call an ambulance," she said, her eyes as calm as if she were reading the weather. From that moment, everything changed. Damien began suffering insomnia. He grew distant and directionless. Lillian and Nolan had him committed for compulsory psychiatric treatment, each pill and every diagnostic report a trap to strip him of his inheritance. Only one man believed him, his father's old lawyer, Morton. But that man, too, died in a car accident a few months later. Damien tightened his grip on his whiskey glass, his hand trembled. He wasn't drunk, he never let himself get drunk, for fear that a moment's slack would unleash the nightmares. He walked to the window and looked down at the glowing city. Each light represented a life, a home, a peace he'd never known. His phone buzzed with a message from his psychiatrist. "I've arranged for you to see a specialist in Boston. Her name is Isabelle Hartley. I believe she can help you. This is your last chance before you return to the hospital. Damien stared at the text as though it were a cruel joke. Psychology? Therapy? He had once been the strongest man on Wall Street. Now he was expected to sit and bare his soul like a wounded child? He let out a bitter laugh. Then his eyes fell on an old handwritten letter from his father, never sent, discovered after his death. If ever you feel there is no way out, find someone who can look into your eyes without fear. You don't need a protector, you need someone who truly listens. Damien stared at the familiar handwriting for a long time. Finally, he picked up the phone and called his assistant. Book a flight to Boston. Isabelle set down her herbal tea and clasped her notebook. She glanced at the wall clock, 9:27 a.m. First appointments usually arrive late, clients often hesitate before crossing the threshold. She didn't know who today's new patient would be, only that his name was Damien Caldwell, a high-profile businessman referred by Dr. Thomas, an old colleague. Normally she avoided corporate clients, but something, an inexplicable intuition, made her pause. The door chime rang. Isabelle stood, smoothed her jacket, and opened the door. A tall man in a long black coat stood there, eyes as cold as winter. Damien Caldwell, he said in a dry, low voice. My appointment was at 9:30. Isabelle gave a small nod. Please come in. Her office was Scandinavian in style, white walls, a mouse-gray armchair, potted plants in the corners. Opposite her desk sat a chaise lounge where she usually welcomed clients. Damien entered and sat without a glance around him. He folded his arms defensively and met her gaze only briefly. Shall we begin? He asked, suspicion ringing in his tone. Isabelle didn't answer immediately. She observed his posture, rigid, braced, arms locked as if to shield himself. Eyes that never held hers for more than 2 seconds. She recognized this type, deep wounds hidden beneath steel armor. We'll begin when you're ready, she said softly but firmly. Damien snorted. I'm not here to be ready. Dr. Thomas thinks I need someone to talk to. Isabelle made a note, mild resistance, distrust of therapy. Then we can start without talking, she suggested, maintaining eye contact. Just sit and feel. Feel. He frowned. I manage $12 billion portfolios. I don't feel. I analyze and decide. Then how does it feel not to be able to decide for your own mind? She countered. Damien fell silent. The room grew heavier. For the first time, he studied her face closely, a gentle exterior framing eyes like a thin, sharp blade. No one had ever dared to ask him that. I dream every night that I die, he said after a long pause. Isabelle tilted her head. How do you die? Different ways. He looked toward the window. Sometimes by drowning. Sometimes by falling downstairs. Once. I hanged myself. Was anyone watching? She asked quietly. He pressed his lips together. Yes. But they did nothing. A long silence ensued. Isabelle did not write. She placed her hand gently on her knee. Damien, I can't help you if you're just killing time here. But if you truly fear those dreams, I can stay with you through each nightmare. Damien looked at her. For a fleeting moment, just one, it was as if the child inside him heard warmth for the first time. A week later, Damien returned, 15 minutes late but present. Isabelle did not blink. Tardiness was typical of guarded clients, a test to see, will she wait for me? And she had waited. Not from courtesy, but because behind Damien's icy gaze, she sensed a soul screaming in silence. Today he wore a light gray turtleneck, slightly warmer in tone, though his eyes remained heavy and sleepless. Please sit, she said softly. I won't be taking notes today. I'll just listen. Damien settled in and remained silent a long while. Finally he spoke with a sigh. I once had a mother. Isabelle looked up and waited. He stared at the wooden floor, eyes distant. My birth mother, she loved me with everything she had. But she sank into deep depression after my father left her for my stepmother. I remember once she hugged me in the bathroom and whispered, "I'm sorry, Damien. I can't protect you forever." I was 8. The next morning, she was gone. They told me she'd gone mad and was committed. A month later, she died from treatment shock. No inquiry. No questions. Just a mentally ill woman's suicide. Isabelle felt her heart tighten, not for the story itself, but at the hollow way he spoke, as though the boy had already died, leaving only a voice. Then came my father, he continued. He loved me, but wasn't strong enough to protect me from what followed. When he died, I didn't cry. I only felt relief, like a film I didn't have to watch to its end. Isabelle said nothing. She bowed her head slightly in silent tribute, not for his parents, but for the little boy who'd lost everything before he could understand why. "And you?" Damien suddenly asked. Isabelle paused. She wasn't used to patience flipping the script, but in his eyes now there was no challenge, only rare sincerity. "I was abandoned," she said slowly. "My mother brought me to a gas station at night. She said she'd return with our things. She never did. I stood there. For 3 hours. Until someone called the police." "How old were you?" he asked softly. 7. They stared at each other for a long moment, no pity, no cheap empathy, but the recognition of two shattered souls born from the same loneliness. "I wonder," Damien murmured, "if I died. Who would remember me? Not my name, not my fortune, just me." Isabelle answered quietly, "Maybe no one. But if we're alive, there's still a chance to become someone worth remembering." He said nothing. But for the first time, she saw in his face something like acceptance of her presence in his world. Their session ended. As Damien stepped out into the twilight, delicate snowflakes drifted down. Isabelle tidied her desk, then glanced out the window. Under the street lamp, she saw him lingering by his car, unwilling to leave, as if he had nowhere else to go. The steady drip of the shower drowned out the silence in the penthouse bathroom. Damien stood rigid before the large mirror, pale face framed by wet hair, eyes locked onto his own reflection. The glass showed a tall, handsome, well-groomed man, the image the world adored. But to him, it was a stranger. "You're no one anymore, Damien. Piece by piece, they stole you." A voice echoed in his mind, unclear whether it was his father's or his own. Night after night, the nightmares dragged him into darkness. Bound on a staircase by the stepmother holding a blood-red glass of alcohol. Drowning in an ice-bound lake while his father's hand slowly let go. Last night was worse. He stood on the office balcony in a storm wind, a child's whisper in his ear. "Do you want to end it?" He had asked, "Who are you?" And the child had answered, "I'm the part of you you bury alive." He hurled his glass at the mirror. Shards exploded, casting fractured images of him 100 times over, each one cracked and distorted. He panted, hands braced on the sink, sweat soaking his shirt in the freezing air. "What are you, Damien? And what remains of you?" He sank to the floor, head in his knees, eyes vacant. As if by reflex, he opened his phone. On the screen lay an unsent message. "I don't know how much longer I can endure, Isabelle." At the same moment, Isabelle was sorting through files in her office. Among them was Damien's file, one of the few she hadn't dared analyze deeply. Not because he was unreadable, but because each time she looked into his eyes, she saw a mirror of her own loneliness. "Am I getting in too deep?" she wondered, fingers brushing the manila folder. Her phone rang. It was Damien. Surprise cracked her composure. He had never called her outside an appointment. She answered. His voice was husky, whispered through ragged breaths. Can you come now? She asked. I don't want to die anymore. But I don't know how to keep living. Isabelle needed no further plea. 10 minutes later, she stood before his luxury building's lobby. The receptionist recognized her and escorted her up. When the door opened, she found Damien curled on the floor beside the broken mirror, face ashen, like the abandoned child all over again. No reproach. No rushing questions. Isabelle sat on the floor a few feet away, silent. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Finally, Damien turned his head and spoke from somewhere beyond himself. I can't remember the last time someone sat with me without asking anything. Isabelle met his gaze. I didn't come to ask. I came to stay. He smiled faintly, eyes red-rimmed. Without looking at her, he asked, if I'm weak, will you abandon me like everyone else? Isabelle's reply was a whisper only she might hear. I was that abandoned child once. If I left you, I'd betray myself. That morning, the penthouse was strangely bright. Sunlight filtered through the curtains and fell across Damien's face like an unexpected blessing. He opened his eyes and for a moment didn't know where he was. The night's dreams had been too real, too many whispers, too many warped visions. Then he spotted her. Isabelle, asleep in the armchair, book fallen on her lap, hair softly mussed. Not everyone could easily slumber in a room still echoing last night's panic, but she had stayed, neither questioning nor retreating. Damien sat up and gently tugged the blanket back onto her shoulders. His hand trembled, though it had once shaken hands with billionaires and signed billion-dollar deals. Now it trembled caring for a woman asleep before him. Isabelle woke at 7:12. Her voice was hoarse. Did you sleep at all? A little, he said without turning. For the first time in 3 months. She nodded. That's a good start. He gave a small, lonely laugh. Do you know what's funny? What? I have a nearly 3,000 square foot apartment, but I first felt it was warm when you stayed here. Isabelle said nothing but watched him, the Wall Street silver fox admitting his loneliness. When she left just before 9, a man in a black suit waited by the lobby. He handed her a sealed envelope and left without a word. In the car, she opened it. Inside was an old photograph of the orphanage where she'd lived at age 7. But the person standing beside her in the photo was her mother, Margaret Ellis. And in the corner, a handwritten note, beware the Caldwells. Your mother did not die of illness. Isabelle's heart pounded. She had never deeply investigated her mother's death, officially recorded as suicide after a divorce, a child too young to understand and an adult too broken to revisit. But why now? And why after Damien entered her life? It felt as if invisible hands were turning both their fates, unlocking buried memories and pushing her toward a darkness she'd sworn to forget. At that same hour in New York, Nolan Caldwell watched surveillance footage of Isabelle entering the building the night before. He smirked. Finally, the important piece has arrived. Behind him, Lillian Caldwell, Damien's stepmother, stepped forward. Who is she? She demanded. A psychologist, Nolan replied. And? The perfect pawn. Isabelle returned to her office clutching the photograph. She placed it on her desk and stared at her mother's face, the woman whose last trembling words and faint scent of perfume she had desperately tried to erase. Why was Margaret Ellis in that orphanage photo? Why had that note appeared now? Someone was pulling her into a deadly game, and she was only just realizing she was a pawn. Damien called near noon. He made no mention of last night, no thanks, no small talk, only asked, "Are you free this afternoon? I have a 3 p.m. client, but after that." She hesitated. "I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "My childhood home. Where my father died." The rain fell softly as they headed northeast toward St. Lyra Institution. Built in the early 20th century, it now existed in name only, caring for chronic patients with skeleton staff in aging wings. Damien drove with a grave expression. Isabelle sat beside him, clinging to the family archive folder they'd obtained, medical records for Margaret Ellis and Grace Caldwell, 2 women, 2 natural deaths at the same facility less than 2 years apart. Too many coincidences for mere chance. At the rusted iron gate they stopped. Isabelle rolled down her window and read the weathered plaque. St. Lyra Institution, EST. 1912. Is it still operating? She asked. It gets annual funding from the Caldwell Foundation, Damien answered. For your foundation? She was surprised. Not me, he said evilly. Nolan signed the checks 3 years ago. Presenting false credentials, they gained access. Rosalind, an elderly nurse at the reception desk, stiffened when they mentioned Ellis and Caldwell. Miss Ellis. That was long ago, she said. The paper files moved to the basement archives years back. Only senior staff may view them. We won't be long, Damien said and discreetly slid a thick envelope across the desk. Rosalind glanced at it, said nothing, then rose. 10 minutes. Follow me. The basement was dank and dark, shelves of file cabinets stretching like a maze. Rosalind led them to the 1979 to 1995 section, then vanished behind a rolling door. Don't mention how we got in, she whispered. Damien clicked on his phone's flashlight and they began searching. Soon they found 2 folders. File 897, Margaret Ellis. File 902, Grace Caldwell. Both women were diagnosed with acute anxiety disorder with delusional features and concluded with a note. Patient resistant to treatment, transferred to intensive control protocol. Code P19. What is P19? Isabelle asked. Damien frowned. I've never seen that in any medical protocol. They found a separate confidential, Caldwell Research Subdivision binder labeled Method P19. Inside was a chilling description. P19 Protocol, spinal cord stimulation therapy designed to suppress oppositional behavior via neural electrical currents targeting cognition centers. Trial subjects included those with antisocial traits and select high-profile clients designated by Caldwell sponsorship. The final progress note read, Patient Ellis, respiratory arrest after session 4. Conclusion, unable to adapt to P19 intensity. Body disposed under code E-alpha, no in-house records retained. Isabelle dropped the binder, her face drained of color. My mother did not kill herself. Damien was stunned. He opened the Grace Caldwell file and read the same, death after the 3rd session, records sealed. Behind them, a metallic clang echoed, the basement door slamming shut. We've been discovered, Damien hissed. This way. He pulled her through a service corridor. They raced up the stairs and burst out a rear exit. 2 men in black suits emerged from the front, shouting, Stop. You're not authorized here. Damien shoved Isabelle into the car and sped off before they could reach them. Inside, neither spoke. Isabelle stared into the rain-slicked night, knuckles white. They experimented on my mother like a lab rat. Damien's voice cracked. And on mine. Nolan's reactivating something Dad buried. Late afternoon found them in rural southern Vermont, at a rundown farmhouse hidden among snow-clad maples. This was the safe house of Agnes Moore, a nurse who served at St. Lyra for 30 years and was the only living witness to the P19 program. She had vanished after a staged internal investigation, no trace. But a media contact of Damien's had uncovered her new alias and address. 3 slow knocks and the door creaked open. Agnes Moore, in her 70s with silver hair and piercing eyes, studied them in silence before asking, Caldwell? Or Ellis? Isabelle swallowed. Damien nodded. Both. Agnes stepped back. Come in. You have 15 minutes, then be gone. The dim interior smelled of old wood and mothballs. Agnes poured tea without invitation and settled into a chair. "You're Margaret Ellis's daughter," she stated, eyes flicking to Isabelle. Your gaze, so full of fire and suspicion. Isabelle braced herself. "You treated my mother." Agnes did not deny it. "I'm not proud. But I don't forget." Damien leaned forward. "We need the truth. What was P19? Who orchestrated it?" Agnes regarded them for a long moment, then spoke slowly. P19 wasn't therapy. It was a neural control experiment launched by a Caldwell Foundation council in the late 80s. Its aim: erase resistance by rewriting brain pathways, turn patients into ideal citizens, compliant, obedient, memory erased. "They picked my mother?" Isabelle's voice cracked. "They picked anyone difficult. Your mother was strong. After her husband abandoned her, she knew too much to be left alive. They admitted her under the guise of care, but truly to wipe her memory." "Yours, too?" Damien interjected, voice trembling. Agnes turned to him. "Grace was an error. She never should have been there. But she uncovered suspicious financial records your father created against Lillian. They labeled her delusional. P19 isn't flawed, the people behind it are." Isabelle stood abruptly. "They killed my mother to silence her. And they did the same to his mother." Agnes nodded. "The Caldwell Foundation is a labyrinth. Everyone who enters gets a new name, a new past, and when they outlive their usefulness, they vanish." "Is there proof?" Damien pressed. "We need something undeniable." Agnes rose and shuffled into the next room. She returned with a dusty metal box. "Room 43 at St. Lyra. Sealed for decades. Inside are the original case files, the signed protocols, the actual treatment logs, and a recording of a P19 session. I hid copies there, knowing someone would come looking." "Why wait so long?" Isabelle's voice trembled. Agnes's eyes grew distant as if the past had just caught up. "I once believed no one could survive the truth." Rain fell through the night. Before dawn, Damien and Isabelle slipped back into Boston, not covertly this time. They knew exactly where to go: room 43. On the third subbasement level of St. Lyra lay the most dangerous ward, sealed after a small fire in 1997. Corridors reeked of mildew, lights flickered, and the air was thick with decay. Using a corporate security override, Damien unlocked the heavy door with a satisfying click. A rush of cold air greeted them. Room 43 stood at the corridor's end, its thick door yellowed with an official Department of Health seal. Isabelle hesitated before touching the brittle seal. "We're about to uncover what destroyed our families." Damien's jaw set. "And haul it into the light." Inside, there was an iron cabinet, an ancient desk, and a vintage film projector. No bodies, only silent evidence waiting to speak. Isabelle opened the cabinet and found two large binders marked P19 Project, Part 3/5, High Resistance Level A, Margaret Ellis. P19 Project, Part 4/5, Consciousness Disintegration, Grace Caldwell. He flipped on the projector. Grainy black and white footage appeared: her mother, bound to a chair, eyes wide, oxygen tube in her mouth. A man's voice commanded, "Begin cycle 4. Increase voltage by 15%. A crackling shriek, a body convulsing. Isabelle stumbled backward, hands over her face, tears pouring. Damien shut off the projector. The hush was suffocating. "This is enough," he said in a steel whisper. She nodded, though her hands shook violently. They gathered all documents, video reels, and hurried out. On the second-floor landing, footsteps thundered behind them, walkie-talkies crackling. "They are in Section 43. Stop them." Damien grabbed Isabelle's hand and vaulted down the fire stairs. They burst through a broken window and bolted to the parking lot. Two black-clad men emerged seconds later, shouting orders. But Damien had the engine running. They tore away into the storm. The day before the company's annual shareholders' meeting, the Caldwell Tower buzzed like a fortress. Employees scurried, presentations were polished to perfection, and internal security had doubled its watch. No one suspected the real storm was brewing, not in markets, but in the hearts of two people emerging from darkness, Damien Caldwell and Isabelle Hartley. Damien waited in his car, gaze fixed on Nolan's office high above. Overnight, he had leaked the P19 files to 2 independent news outlets and an international human rights group, anonymous, unsigned, with one message: the deaths of innocent women cannot be buried. Everything would erupt within 24 hours. Before chaos rendered his efforts futile, he had to face the final act: Nolan Caldwell, the brother he'd once cradled, now the brother who'd stolen everything from him. On the 63rd floor, the executive boardroom was empty when Damien entered. Nolan sat with his back to the door, looking out at Manhattan, sipping whiskey. "You are here," he said without turning. "Surprised I came unescorted?" Damien replied quietly. "Why fear when you're about to vanish again?" Nolan wheeled around, mockery in his eyes. "Or do you think you can save the empire you abandoned?" Damien set a folder on the table: the P19 dossiers, video, Agnes's audio testimony. Nolan's grin faltered. He crushed the glass in his hand. "You think paper will undo what I built?" he snarled. "No," Damien said softly, "but it's enough to send you to trial. And this time, no one can buy their way out." Nolan sprang up, eyes blazing. "You are dead, Damien, crazy, broken. I tried to spare you a lifetime in an asylum. But you walked out." "I'm not sparing you," Damien replied. "I'm controlling my destiny the way father did to mother. The way mother did to him. And now I reclaim mine." The door burst open, Isabelle entered. Nolan's face went white. "You shouldn't be here." "Who else will speak for the victims?" she challenged, stepping forward. "Who do you think you are? You're just the daughter of a madwoman," Nolan roared. "No," Isabelle's voice rang clear, eyes blazing, "I'm the daughter of someone who refused to lose her humanity. She wasn't sick, she was murdered by the program you sanctioned." Nolan faltered. Before he could recover, Damien pressed him face down on the table. "You can kill me," Nolan spat, "but you can't erase the Caldwell name." "I don't need to," Damien whispered. "Justice will do that." Damien played an incriminating recording from Nolan himself, an admission of orchestrating Damien's psychiatric commitment. Within minutes, law enforcement flooded the building. Nolan was handcuffed on the 63rd floor, before shocked shareholders and reporters who'd just received the P19 exposé reels. His final glance at Damien was empty of triumph, full of defeat. Later, Damien stood by the window, gazing at the city lights where his father had once plunged. Isabelle came to his side, saying nothing. After a while, he turned to her, voice weary yet gentle. "For the first time. My name isn't tainted by blood." 3 weeks passed since Nolan Caldwell's arrest. The media maelstrom was relentless: Project P19, neural experiments on psychiatric patients, Caldwell Foundation scandal splashed across front pages. Survivors, family members, retired nurses, all stepped forward. Governments opened investigations, charities withdrew funding. Caldwell Holdings, once a Wall Street titan, cracked like a glass tower. But amid the chaos, 2 people quietly began a different chapter. Damien left New York for good. He didn't return to the mansion or the corporate headquarters. Instead, he rented a modest apartment in Cambridge, just 2 blocks from Isabelle's practice. He still battled insomnia, but the nightmares thinned, not from medication, but from Isabelle's presence, her hand on his, grounding him. One rainy Boston morning, he knocked on her office door bearing 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag of croissants. She looked up, smiling. You know I don't drink coffee before dawn. He shrugged. I'm hopeful. And you think one day I'll swap my oatmeal for pastries? She teased. He set the bag down. Not entirely. But you deserve something sweet, at least once in the morning. They sat on the daybed by the window. Rain pattered on the glass. Isabelle opened a thick dossier, not a patient file, but a blueprint titled, Proposal for the Hartley Caldwell Center for Psychological Healing, specializing in depression, PTSD, and post-traumatic identity reintegration. That name's a mouthful, Damien observed. What would you call it? She asked, amused. Home, he answered simply. She laughed, truly laughed, free of pretense. For the first time, she wasn't the stoic doctor hiding her cracks. She was a woman finally learning to be loved. Damien watched her laugh, then said softly, I always thought the world wasn't made for people like me, people who wanted to die, who'd been betrayed by their own blood from birth. But then I met you. Isabelle closed the dossier and met his gaze. No further words needed. That taught me, Damien continued, that as long as someone stays, anyone can earn a chance to live. That afternoon, they walked hand in hand along the Charles River, autumn leaves drifting on the water, fragile peace born of survival and new beginnings. No grand declarations, no cinematic kiss, only two souls looking ahead, neither alone anymore. 1 year later. Spring came late to Boston. Snow thawed slowly, but sunlight was enough to warm the wood panel facade of their newly completed center, its handcrafted sign reading, Hartley Caldwell Center for Psychological Healing. Inside, no antiseptic smell, no harsh fluorescent glare, only natural light pouring through wide windows, the scent of peppermint tea, and gentle laughter from lives once fractured. Isabelle stood on the second-floor balcony, watching a 10-year-old boy doodle while his mother, recovering from severe PTSD after divorce, chatted with a therapist. She didn't intervene. The center had been open 6 months. She no longer carried every burden alone. She was no longer the trembling child at a gas station. She had gone far enough. And deep enough. To become part of the light she once sought. Downstairs, Damien moved quietly. He did not run the center, he refused titles like founder or major sponsor. He simply said, I tend the gardens and keep the tea warm. But Isabelle knew he did so much more. He spoke with veteran patients, shared with young people who had once wanted to die. He didn't recount his past, but his eyes held the empathy only true wounds can teach. That afternoon, they strolled by a pond near Harvard, where they'd first glimpsed each other after their 3rd session, he standing silently by his car. Isabelle spoke of a new 16-year-old client who hadn't spoken since a car accident. Damien mentioned a small local paper calling their center a sanctuary for souls once dead. They didn't need to discuss the past, but it still flickered back sometimes, not as a threat, but like a stranger who once sought refuge and then moved on. Seated on a bench beneath budding branches, Damien asked unexpectedly, Have you ever wondered? What if your mother had returned that night? Isabelle looked afar before shaking her head. If she had come back, maybe I wouldn't be as strong. But I don't need her to return. I have people brave enough to stay. She turned to him. And you, someone who never looked back, even when you had every reason to vanish. Damien took her hand, gentle but firm, and did not speak. In that quiet moment, they were no longer survivors. They were truly alive, under the dawn of a new day, with what remained in them, trust, forgiveness, and love untethered from their past. 3 years later. A gentle autumn morning in Portland, Maine, found a small wooden house basking in sunlight. Lavender bloomed in the backyard, and maple leaves carpeted the stone path. Children's laughter tinkled in the air, mingled with the breeze under the porch roof, and somewhere echoed the laughter of a man who once believed his life could only ever be silent. Damien opened the back door with a steaming mug of coffee, hair tousled and face alight. He paused to watch a little girl racing around the oak tree, her laughter ringing, "Daddy? Catch me." Isabelle emerged from the kitchen, flour dusted and smiling, hands folded expectantly. "You used to say you didn't like kids," she teased. "I never knew," he admitted, "that their laughter could mend the shards within me." The girl, named Lena, was the orphan they'd adopted after Isabelle had volunteered in a program for abandoned children. Lena had arrived mute and withdrawn, clinging to a battered teddy bear. Isabelle had shown relentless kindness. Damien had done what he never thought he could, told bedtime fairy tales, learned to cook chicken soup, and waited by her door every morning. Now Lena's laughter was as bright as sunshine. At night, she slept peacefully beneath a moon-shaped lamp, a testament to hope made real. That evening, the family gathered on the porch wrapped in a light quilt, reading storybooks. Damien read in a playful wolf's voice, and Lena giggled into her mother's shoulder. Isabelle whispered, "I once thought I'd never have a family." Damien placed the book aside, pulling both of them into his arms. "I thought family was just a concept for others. Not for us." "What about now?" she asked softly. He held them close and whispered, "Now I know. Family isn't where you arrive. It's whom you choose to stay with, every single day." And in that house of laughter, they lived, truly lived, ever after.